Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Roberts. We begin tonight in the Northwest Territories, where the Health and Social Services Authority is sending a nurse to Jean Marie River, though it hasn't confirmed when. The community's chief asked for help after a number of people got sick with respiratory illnesses. Chief Melanie Menico says she asked the health authority to send a nurse and doctor to the community. She was concerned about the number of people in Jean Marie River with respiratory illnesses. In an email today, a health authority spokesperson says they're aware health workers and community members are reporting respiratory symptoms, but they say there's no outbreak in Jean Marie River. The health authority says the number of respiratory illnesses reported in the NWT to the health authority is lower so far this year than in previous years. The health authority confirmed that there was a recent unexpected death in Jean Marie River, but didn't say whether it was connected to respiratory illness. In Nunavut, a resident of Pangnaktu is raising concerns about prescription medication labeled only in English. Some residents are unilingual in Inuktitut, which means they can't read the medication themselves, and a mistake could have serious consequences. Carl Cardinal has that story.
Pitsula Kilabuk is a Penington resident. She is worried about her elderly father who requires daily medication. Her father is unilingual and cannot read the English instructions on his pills bottle. Kilabuk says she's unable to assist him because she lives in a different community.
I know health centers probably do their best to translate the prescription medication, but it's not always done. If we get them directly from the pharmacy, they're not translated, and the medication labels should be. Even the explanations are not in Inuktitut, and what I get concerned is if there was mistakes.
Back in 2021, the Department of Health began working on a translation project for medication labels, but the initiative was paused by the COVID-19 pandemic. John Main is the Nunavut Minister of Health. He says his team has resumed work on the project. The goal is to provide universal Inuktitut translation for the most commonly used medications, including pill bottle label and instruction sheets.
We've heard from Nunavut residents that this is a concern. We've heard directly from elders that this is a concern, and this project that we're working on is us trying to respond to those concerns, trying to make things better in terms of use of Inuktitut.
However, the translation project is being developed for health center. Currently, there is no legislation requiring retail pharmacies to include Inuktitut translation on pills bottle. At this time, no timeline has been set for the project's completion. Carl Cardinal, CBC News, Iqaluit.
A former Yellowknife City councillor was cross-examined in court today. Robin Williams is on trial for multiple counts of assault against the same woman over several years. He pleaded not guilty to all 14 charges. He says the woman accusing him was often drunk during the alleged events and that she was emotionally unstable. Under questioning from the Crown prosecutor, Williams explained his memory of one of the alleged assaults. The woman is accusing Williams of dragging her by the hair. He told the courtroom he was helping her up after she had drunkenly fallen off her chair. In the process, he says her hair got caught in his zipper. The woman's identity is protected by a publication ban. The trial continues tomorrow. Researchers say data on salmon from parts of Yukon, British Columbia, and Alaska is incomplete. Now, after completing a new study, they say that needs to change. Researchers with the Pacific Salmon Foundation looked into several watersheds across the regions. Monitoring has focused on stocks that have economic value and the number of fish swimming in different watersheds. That includes Chinook and sockeye. The study's lead author says it's not just about counting the number of fish. Age, weight, and size also need to be assessed.
And if we don't assess and try and maintain that diversity, we might end up losing it to the extent where, maybe we won't have early run fish anymore or late run fish. And that has implications for communities that depend on these salmon because they no longer have a season that extends into the late fall or starts early in the summer. And so there's this idea that the diversity within the species can actually not only make the fish themselves more resilient, but can stabilize the benefits to communities that depend on salmon as well.
The research says compared to long-term averages, the number of coho increased in 2023 in Cluckshoe in the Yukon Southwest. Still, Peacock says more research on the entire run is needed to ensure it's not just a one-off. Work is underway in Dawson City, Yukon to create a land use plan. The Trondequetchin First Nation and Yukon government are collaborating on how the region should be co-managed. And as Chris McIntyre reports, they hope to reach a big milestone this spring.
Creating a land use plan is a slow process. There's many people involved. In the Dawson City region, this plan will lay the groundwork for how roughly 10% of the Yukon's landmass will be co-managed by the Indigenous government here and the territorial government. The Trondequetchin Land Claims Agreement includes the right for Indigenous government to have a say in how public resources are managed within their traditional territory, and there's already a draft plan for that. And as part of the process, there are opportunities for both the Yukon government and Trondequetchin to come together for feedback, like here today. The Trondequetchin are recommending more rules around protecting salmon and caribou habitats and populations. There's also discussion from the First Nation about wanting more protection for undisturbed wetlands and stricter regulations and collaboration when it comes to sustainable development in the region. Now, the Yukon government wants more clarity, particularly around the definitions of reclamation and restoration. Kirsten Reed is a senior planner with the Commission tasked with overseeing all of this. She says the recommendations from both sides will now be reviewed.
The parties have definitely aligned on a lot of things, but there's definitely some issues where they're far apart on what they would like to see. And so the Commission certainly have their work cut out for them. They've got a lot of meetings in the next several months. And they got a big challenge ahead of them. And their staff will be working with them to figure out what the best option is for the final recommended plan.
A draft of the finalized plan is expected this spring. The Commission hopes to have it done by April before the mining and tourism sector starts their season. Chris McIntyre, CBC News, Dawson City.
A major mining conference continues in Vancouver. The annual AME Roundup Mining and Exploration Conference attracts people from across the world. Yukon politicians are among those in attendance. And the question on everyone's mind is, what's the future of the mining sector in the territory? As Jackie Hong reports, it depends on who you ask.
It's been a busy week so far for the Yukon's Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources. John Stryker says he's been in back-to-back meetings with First Nations, other provincial and territorial governments, and companies. Some of the questions he's been fielding are about the Yukon's approach to mining and exploration. Stryker says the territory needs to be competitive and viable for industry, but also responsible in its approach.
We need to make sure that when we have mining and we're taking that endowment of the minerals out of the land, that we're doing it in a way that is going to not leave a legacy of contamination. That's so important.
Stryker says one success story the government can look to is the abandoned Minto mine. 2 years in, Stryker says reclamation efforts are going well, and the local First Nation is set to buy it. He also says there's lots to be learned from the heap leach failure at Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold Mine last summer, and that the Yukon government is still working on modernizing the territory's minerals legislation. Stryker is far from the only Yukon politician at Roundup. Yukon opposition party leader Curry Dixon has also been attending numerous meetings. He says he's heard a lot of concerns from industry.
We're hearing a lot about challenges with infrastructure, challenges with energy, and challenges with the permitting and regulatory system in the Yukon. And of course, looming large over all those conversations are the situation that's happened with Eagle Gold and the Victoria Gold mine that has faced some issues over the last year, and what the future is for that project and the industry as a whole.
Dixon says the Yukon needs to give the mining industry more certainty. Roundup continues for the rest of the week. Jackie Hong, CBC News, Vancouver.
Waste management was a key topic at a public roundtable on climate change at Yellowknife City Hall on Tuesday. The City of Yellowknife wants residents' input as it develops its next climate action plan. The CBC's Nadir Hashmi has more.
Yellowknife is creating a new climate action plan to guide the city's efforts over the next decade. The plan will start in 2026. Yesterday, 8 people attended the roundtable to share ideas. Many were representing groups or organizations. The executive director of Ecology North highlighted the need to improve the city's organic waste management.
Our municipal compost program was developed 10 years after Whitehorse, and when theirs was about 10 years old, they invested in expanding into the industry commercial sector. And so that's getting more businesses and restaurants and implementing that program in that area. And we haven't done that yet. And I think it's time for us to do that.
Trombley says it is important to keep organic waste out of landfills because otherwise methane gas is released during decomposition, contributing to climate change. There were also discussions asking the city to do more to keep construction waste out of its landfill. A participant said repurposing construction waste could make a big difference.
We're trucking in lumber. Making concrete is an emission-intense activity. All of the materials that we use in construction are carbon-intense. If we can eliminate some of that stuff, these are win-wins, and it's more cost-efficient.
Little says municipalities across Canada are already tackling this issue. She says the city should also be looking into it. Another Yellowknife resident said the city should promote active transportation and plan for it better.
Like biking in the city of Yellowknife. We live in a 15-minute city. It's a small city. We could easily incorporate active transportation into our everyday lives. So I'd like to see a little bit more of that.
The climate action plan is developed by a consulting firm. They expect to be done by August. Nadir Hashmi, CBC News, Yellowknife.
The Kanuipita National Inuit Health Survey team is going to every community in Nunavut, speaking to Inuit about their health and wellness. And every answer will help us as Inuit determine our own priorities for a healthier future. Together, we will answer the question, Kanuipita, how are we? Find out when we're coming to your community. Learn more at qnihs.ca.
I've never seen anything like this before.
The situation has changed very quickly.
In your once stolen vehicle in West Africa.
Jumped in the car and then off they went.
I want my truck back. 300% increase in auto theft.
300%.
It's organized crime, well-financed.
They are selling vehicles that are insecure.
They're working on it.
We hear that from a lot of automakers.
Yeah.
We think we found your car.
Oh my goodness.
This is CBC North on your smart TV because CBC News is now streaming local. Local news and weather on your connected TV or favorite device. CBC News North, streaming now.
It makes sense that they get a larger share, or does it?
Welcome to the Greenbelt.
All of this, just single detached homes?
Yes.
What do we know? I think we can explain.
About that with Andrew Chang.
Some of Canada's most vulnerable people are facing a new hardship, a highly contagious drug-resistant stomach bug called Shigella. Infections can be severe or even fatal, and it's getting harder to treat with antibiotics. Jennifer Yoon has more.
Night after night, Nurse Karen Lemire is confronted with suspected cases of a highly contagious illness known as Shigella.
We've been seeing a lot of people coming in complaining of diarrhea, severe fatigue, belly pain. People are embarrassed. They don't necessarily want to talk about it.
There's an outbreak in Toronto, at least 11 confirmed cases among people experiencing homelessness. But the city's public health officer thinks the number is much higher.
Most people will resolve the infection on their own. So we're really only capturing those who are seeking medical attention, going to the hospital to get tested, for instance.
The best prevention for the bacterial infection is through hygiene measures. But for those without a home, access to public toilets is an ongoing challenge. In Edmonton, sanitation measures have helped control cases. Since 2022, over 300 people have been hospitalized there with severe Shigella infections. Public health authorities were helping people find a place to take a shower, use the washroom, and get a change of clothes. But still, there's been an outbreak on and off for years.
As soon as you would get somebody to the right place, 3 more would pop up.
Antibiotics can help and were part of Edmonton's solution, supplied to people living in tents. But in other cities, the stomach bug is getting more resistant to pills.
And if they require antibiotics, they have to either go to the emergency department or go to the hospital to be able to receive IV antibiotics.
And even then, IVs don't work in all cases. Extensively, drug-resistant Shigella has been reported in Europe, Australia, and the US.
There's been cases of it in Seattle, and we occasionally see cases in Vancouver, but luckily it's not that well established.
The best way to prepare against Shigella goes back to prevention. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
Donald Trump's threat to impose tariffs on Canadian goods is spurring politicians here to come up with possible solutions, including one to reduce trade barriers within the country. Kate McKenna looks at what Canada's leaders might do to protect consumers and businesses.
Ottawa and the provinces are dealing with a new reality.
The president likes to operate in an environment of chaos.
Chaos about when or if Donald Trump will hit Canadian goods with sweeping tariffs that could kill hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs. The premiers met virtually today.
We had a really productive meeting with all the premiers and the prime minister and a couple federal ministers as well, making sure we have a solid plan.
Trump's now saying tariffs could come February 1st, after first saying it would happen when he took office.
We've been given a reprieve, whether that's a week or 6 weeks. So there is a time for cooler heads to prevail.
Today, their focus was bolstering Canada's economy and improving trade between provinces.
Why is it so hard to send a bottle of wine from one province to another?
We need to look at internal trade that could pick up the GDP by, I've heard numbers anywhere from $50 to $100 billion.
This is low-hanging fruit for us, relatively speaking. We do not have to go through the United States for us to attack these internal trade barriers.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is in Washington meeting with lawmakers. She split with her fellow premiers last week, coming out hard against using oil as a bargaining chip in a trade war. She attended today's virtual meeting after she posted online, saying the group is moving closer to a consensus on how to handle the U.S. tariff challenge. All premiers agree the best case scenario would be dissuading Donald Trump from implementing these tariffs in the first place. The premiers are planning a trip to Washington in mid-February to make their case to American lawmakers as a team. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
As the potential Trump tariffs loom, some in Canada are pushing to revive a pipeline project through BC to get oil and gas to Asian markets. As Katie DeRosa reports, at least one bitter opponent is now softening their stance.
First Nations leaders and environmental groups spent years fighting Enbridge's controversial Northern Gateway pipeline project.
We will fight this.
The pipeline would have carried diluted bitumen from Alberta to Kitimat to then be shipped by tankers to Asia. But in 2016, its approval was struck down when the federal court found Ottawa had not adequately consulted with Indigenous people along the route. But now, Donald Trump's looming tariff threat has some people reconsidering the project, even those once bitterly opposed.
We are staring into the abyss of uncertainty. Right now, with climate change, the climate crisis, and the American threat. So I would suggest that if we don't build that kind of infrastructure, Trump will.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre are actively pushing for a new pipeline to be built. Smith and others argue it's the only way for Canada to reduce its reliance on exports to the U.S. Assembly of First Nations Chief Terry Teegee says there's no consensus on new energy projects.
Some First Nations agree with some of the projects, whether it's Northern Gateway or LNG, and there are other First Nations that don't.
Premier David Eby says it's vital that Canada diversify its exports, but he says there are limits.
I have some differences of opinion with Premier Smith. When you're advancing proposals, I think it's critically important that the provinces where those those projects may be located, the Indigenous people who may be affected, the national government, I think everybody needs to be a part of those conversations.
Despite all this, Enbridge says it currently has no plans to develop Northern Gateway. Federal Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, meanwhile, says Donald Trump will be in office for the next 4 years, and building a pipeline takes much longer. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
The federal government wants most provinces and territories to cut this year's spaces for immigration programs for skilled workers by half. As Rafi Boudjikanian reports, it's triggering concerns about how those cuts might impact the labor force and the economy.
When it comes to Canada's permanent immigration targets and aligning them to our economic needs, I'm here to announce and confirm that the current plan reduces next year's projections.
That was the federal government last fall announcing cuts were coming. It's now becoming clearer what they will look like.
It's a 50% reduction from where we were last year's.
That's across the board for all provinces and territories except Quebec and Nunavut for what are called the provincial nominee programs, targeting skilled workers in healthcare, trades, food services, or even education. Cuts imposed unilaterally, the provinces charge with no consultation.
We know our labor market. We work with our employers on a regular basis. We're engaged with them.
In New Brunswick's case, the province says trades, health, and education alone require them to hire a couple of thousand new workers from the nominee program this year, more than 2/3 of their allocation.
If we want to build houses and apartments, we will need people with trades. This is our reality. And if we don't have them, what will be the impacts?
There's a further stipulation. Ottawa is requiring 3/4 of nominees this year to be people who are already in Canada waiting to become permanent residents. This expert says that further reduces options for Yukon or the Northwest Territories.
They don't have a large enough temporary resident population compared with other parts of Canada. And so this is where I feel the federal government could have been more considerate.
Provincial immigration departments say they're going to start consulting on what they can do to see if Ottawa can reverse at least some reductions. The federal immigration minister says he's willing to show flexibility, but he points out his office has reduced levels across all categories as part of the federal plan for the next 2 years. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
As you just heard from Rafi, nominee programs across the country are going through major cuts this year, and that includes the Yukon nominee program. The program allows employers to hire foreign workers or nominees with the expectation that they'll live in the territory over the long term. The territorial government says only half the number of nominees can get approved compared to last year. Now, the Yukon can only approve 215 nominees. That number is set by the Federal Immigration Department. Last year, the allocation was 430, and the Yukon government received almost 600 applications by last spring. The program has been closed ever since, and it was supposed to reopen next week. But now the government says it needs time to regroup and strategize with the business community.
There are going to be many stakeholders who will be fighting for a there's a small pie, and everyone is trying to get a piece of this pie. So how do we split the pie? And that's the big issue. And I suppose that's part of what we'll be asking for. Again, as I said,
the Yukon Chamber of Commerce is promising some consultation this week. A survey is also going out to Whitehorse businesses today. Sunny Ryack residents are eagerly awaiting the return of a daycare to the community. It's slated to open early next year, but the multi-million-dollar project has hit a roadblock. Samuel Watt explains.
This daycare, first announced 2 years ago, is billed as Sunny Ryack's biggest infrastructure project since the 90s.
I was excited, like a little kid.
There's $11 million going into this building. At 500 square metres in size, it's expected to accommodate 44 children. It'll also create dozens of jobs, including that of the manager Dinah Pikuyak. She also led the previous daycare. That was shut down in 2004 when the pipes burst in the winter cold.
Most of the parents stopped working for lack of visitors.
So many in town are excited to see this new, bigger daycare. It was supposed to open January 2026, but there's a problem. Construction hasn't even started. Roger Beaudry, Sunny Ayak's Chief Economic Development Officer, says they can't get builders in because there's nowhere to house them for several months.
I've been looking everywhere. Co-op just got 3 houses, and all 3 of them just got condemned yesterday.
The lack of housing has also affected the construction of new community freezers announced in 2020. As for the daycare, Beaudry is now appealing to the Nunavut government to see if they can free up some staff housing.
I have to find a place for those people. We need that daycare. It's too many jobs.
In a statement to CBC News, the Nunavut Housing Corporation says housing for construction workers across the territory is an ongoing challenge, though it is reaching out to Sunny Ayak officials to learn more about this particular concern. Samuel Watt, CBC News, Sunny Ayak.
And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
The question is,
I'm just going to ask.
I want to ask you, but
Why is this such a big deal?
what does the science say?
What was their reaction?
What are we talking about here?
Who told you?
So, to be clear,
What would you say to them?
what is the actual story there?
Big question is what's going to happen tomorrow? Let's talk about some serious topics now.
What should you do?
What happened?
What are you going through? Tell us about that moment.
What she means by that.
How would they have known that? What we're hearing from people is
I think we can explain.
How can any of this be fair?
Now you might think, hey, we just need more doctors, but that's not really it.
Russian scheme here.
shows you where it starts, where it ends.
Were you really willing to risk that job?
Yes.
At Thunder Bay's favorite festival, Wake the Giant.
Ta-da! There it is.
Stream anytime. CBC News.
This is CBC North on your smart TV because CBC News is now streaming local. Local news and weather on your connected TV or favorite device. CBC News North, streaming now.
We're here to get it done. We're here to show up and show off.
Here we go. Let's play the feud, Canadian style. Here we go.
Family Feud Canada. Watch free on CBC Gem. Join me for Commotion, available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.